Hey YouTubers, John or Shy Cubs Fan 14 here, bringing you some gameplay from Bootleg. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. What I want to talk about is the rising epidemic of bath salt poisonings. Currently, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed legislation that would outlaw bath salts and other chemicals that are sold at convenience stores and on the internet as legal highs. These same compounds have been implicated in deaths and accidental poisonings all around the country. The only problem is that the legislation is currently being held up in the federal level in the Senate by a senator named Rand Paul, who is a Republican from the state of Kentucky. The number of calls to poison control centers nationwide involving bath salts soared in 2011 to about 6,100 from about 304 or about 300 in 2010. These drugs, if you don't know, come in a powder or crystal form, and they actually resemble conventional bath salts. People that are looking to get high on these types of powders or crystals, they either snort them or they'll eat them. Occasionally they'll smoke them. Dozens of teens and young adults have been hospitalized in recent months, and even some have died. And they have died after they've smoked, snorted, or swallowed the chemicals. And what these chemicals do is they mimic the highs associated with drugs like marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy. When you hear a story like this, there's always the horror story that's associated with that. And I found a bunch of different horror stories on the internet looking around, but there are two that I found quite interesting. The first is about a 22-year-old kid in Blaine, Minnesota, and he pled guilty to murder last month and is currently facing a possible sentence of 20 years in prison. And this happened after he shared a synthetic hallucinogen that he purchased on the internet with his friend, who ended up dying. But I think a better story and a more poignant story is about a girl from Bowling Green, Kentucky. Yes, Kentucky, the same state that Senator Paul represents. This girl used a bath salt type of compound. The way the story goes is she was hanging out in the hookah bar with her friends when she tried it, and within about 3 minutes, she was paralyzed. Now, obviously, she wasn't dead, but she couldn't move, she couldn't respond. And what really scared her is she could actually hear her friends talking about her and having a conversation about her while she was laying there paralyzed, and they were discussing of how they could dispose of her body in a river if she died. Luckily, she didn't die. The effects of the substance wore off. She called her mom and dad. They came. They rushed her to the hospital. The doctors there weren't really sure what was wrong or how to handle it. They ended up calling poison control, which helped them treat her, and she made a full recovery. The DEA is currently using its emergency powers to temporarily outlaw the substances, but 3 synthetic stimulants used to make bath salts expires on October 21st. The manufacturers of these mixtures evade regulations by putting a warning label on the package that says that it isn't intended for human consumption. What that really means is kids are taking these things that are made under unregulated and unlicensed conditions and using them. They're not really bath salts, but things that are made in basements, garages, and warehouses by people who aren't sterile and are working probably in squalor type settings. The good news is that 34 states have outlawed bath salts. A permanent federal ban, of course, would allow the DEA to act against people who import the drugs, people who sell the drugs on the internet, and of course the people that ship them across state line. The funniest thing in this whole story, though, is that Senator Paul, that guy from Kentucky, is actually a doctor, and he's holding up the vote on the floor of the Senate. Now, I know a lot of you that are in the gaming community are young adults, and you have to deal with all the pressures that are associated with that age. I'm just asking you guys to be aware of what's going on around you. The hookah bar of today was the Clover cigarette from 20 years ago. And what did we find out about the Clover cigarette? It crystallizes in your lungs and makes bad things happen. So I'm just asking you guys to be aware of the pressures, respect your bodies, and you know what? If you're going to experiment, you're going to experiment, but there may be some ramifications that you don't want to deal with. I appreciate you stopping by. Likes are appreciated. Comments are always welcome. Let me know how I'm doing. I'd really appreciate it.